On August 18, 1950, in Trenton, New Jersey, Mr. Daniels was born. His father worked in maintenance and a mother who was a home baker. He was the baby of the family, having 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. His mom died when he was 18 months and went to live with his grandmother. His grandmother died when he was 3. After that, he moved to Philadelphia for the rest of his time growing up. Mr. Daniels had his own business. He went around painting houses for people. Mr. Daniels wasn't the only one from his family to be in the military. He said,
My entire family, my father was in the Army with the 7th Division. My uncles were in the Army and the Navy. And my older brother, he was in the Air Force. And my middle brother, he was in the Navy.
when the Vietnam War broke out in 1968, he couldn't go in and enlist right away because he had 2 other brothers in the military. He was the baby of the family and had to wait for one of the brothers to retire from the service. He enlisted when he could, and when he did, he enlisted to the Marine Corps. After he enlisted to the Marines, he left for training on September 9, 1973. Boot camp was something he had to adjust to. Once he did, every so often it became natural to Mr. Daniels. When he was done with boot camp, they sent him down to Huntsville, Alabama to Redstone Arsenal Camp, where James learned about ammunition. Getting through ammunition school was interesting and fun, Mr. Daniels said.
You do 10 weeks of Army school and then 2 weeks of Marine Corps school because you have to learn the DODICs, the NFNs, the numbers, the different language from the Army to the Marine Corps for the ammunition.
When he was done, he would become an ammunition soldier, someone who deals with supplying ammunition for those on the front line fighting. Mr. Daniels never served on the front line in his service time. His job was to make sure the troops had enough materials for fighting. His company only went into the field only 2 weeks out of the year. Mr. Daniels wasn't the grunt unit or the grunt battalion. His group was the rear unit because it had the ammunition. He supported the troops that were on the front lines. His job was to make sure that there would be enough ammo to fight with. Mr. Daniels set up the ammo dumps and supplied the ammunition. His job was like a warehouse job, only with protocol and strict rules. Mr. Daniels was stationed in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, for most of the war. He said it was hot down there and it was a beautiful sight for seeing. In fact, he liked it so much after he got out of the Marines, he stayed down in North Carolina to live for about 2 years before he came home to Pennsylvania. His job at the Rifle Detachment Camp was to issue out the ammunition for it to be pre-qualified, which means they had to test it to make sure it was ready to be used. When they were done firing the ammo, Mr. Daniels had to get a truck to collect all the brass and take it back to the main camp and turn it in. He also kept the records and inventory. Mr. Daniels didn't see much of the war itself because the only time he left the States was those 2 weeks out of the year and when he helped evacuate Lebanon. The Vietnam War was a civil war. The country was fighting over communism and democracy. While the war was going on, the military asked for volunteers to go out on the Mike boats to help the people escape the war. The Russians sent in a letter saying they didn't want any Marines going in, just the Navy. So all the Marines dressed in dungaree blue and navy blue shirts. They stored their weapons in the holders of the Mike boats and pretended to be sailors. The crew left in 76. He left the States and went to Greece, where the crew anchored for 4 days with Russian destroyers around them. Around July 4th, Mr. Daniels' boat command sent out a message that the next day would be their Independence Day and they would be celebrating it. Mr. Daniels remembers waking up on July 4th and all the Russian ships were gone. They enjoyed their day, had fun out in the water. He remembers going to bed after they were done celebrating, and the next morning the ships were back around them. When they got to Lebanon, seeing the people stand on the beach waiting for them was something traumatic to the troops. They feared for the safety of the people they were fighting. They didn't want anybody to get shot or injured during the evacuation. When they got the people they were evacuating, they took them to Athens, Greece. On the way there, many of the people would talk to the troops. James asked one of them what they were going to do when the war was over. They all said they were going to move back to Lebanon and rebuild. Like other people, the troops needed to eat. The food they got wasn't poor food. It was good and delicious. The Navy cooks were good, and they gave nothing but the best they could. Mr. Daniels didn't see any entertainers during the war. While he was serving, he got homesick and missed his family. He kept in touch with his family by writing letters, and when he got to a port, he would call to his family. Daniels said, "We didn't get much mail, but every 2 weeks it came in by helicopter to drop off with the ship. When James was out helping with evacuations, he got homesick, he missed his people, and wished they could be there with him. He overcame the homesickness and stuck out the evacuations because he was doing what he wanted to do." When Mr. Daniels had downtime, he would go out with the other troops and go sightseeing. He went out and saw how the people would live in different countries compared to how we live. He really wanted to see what the countries were like and what they stood for. He was there to do his duty as a Marine, but when he had his leisure time, he and a few troops would go out and see the world for more than just a war. Mr. Daniels was awarded a letter of appreciation from the Navy. He got this letter because
Yeah, I wish I had, went on and did my 20 years got on out, but, if I re-enlisted, I would have retention on station means I would have stayed there at the rifle range because I had transferred from force troops to Marine Corps base. And that was like a 9 to 5 job, like a banker's job. I wasn't going to the field or anything. I was more office personnel.
he wanted to stay and do more than ammunition, but he didn't. He pursued another career after the war. He went to Philadelphia Community College for 2 years and majored in computer science. The war had a huge impact on Mr. Daniels' life. He learned how lucky we have it over here in the United States. Mr. Daniels saw what he did and said all the other countries aren't as blessed as we are. They don't have the rights the American citizens do. Most other countries live in poverty. They have dictators and tyrants that try to run their country. The misery people live in, Mr. Daniels said. We are fortunate to live in a democracy that we are able to live and do what we want and do what we want to do in our life. We saw that over in the countries they didn't have it as lucky as we do. They live in misery because people try to run their lives, and if they don't listen, some might be subjected to death. Being over in the war, he learned some valuable lessons that changed his life for the better.
Yes, I did. I learned honor, to respect uh, people of different cultures. Uh, I learned, that you have to, if you want to, show somebody, you have to be, presentable to them. Don't try to show that you're authoritarian over them. That you can relate to their situation.
He learned these things by seeing and doing, which proves his point when he said you have to learn, you have to show somebody you can do it. He did just that when he needed to prove to somebody he could, he did. His advice to anyone entering the Marines is,
I would say you're going into the Marine Corps. You got to learn the rules to obey. Take it seriously. It's very important. The discipline they teach you later on in life, you'll need it because it's you learn a lot from different places you go, the different things you do, and it'll help you later on in life.
his experience led him to be the person he is today. Mr. Daniels will never forget his surroundings during this time. He said,
The people, the suffering, uh, the mistreatment. Uh, People just wanted to live like we live in peace and harmony, but there's people that don't, that want to control their life, to be totally control of them. And it's not right. Person's supposed to have uh, freedom to do what they want. But in other countries, a lot of times they're not like that.
Mr. Daniels was one of 98 Marines in the Army base where he was stationed. He learned how to take ammunition apart and how to test radii missiles. The women had outdid the men in competitions during the war. They had drill comps every now and again. They didn't expect women to be so good. And when they outdid the men, the generals could see Mr. Daniels' group taking first or second, but the women, that made him feel embarrassed. He went to school and was fourth in his class at his ammunition school. With all of his hard work, Mr. Daniels got promoted to many other levels with being in charge of groups. He worked as a mailman and a company driver at one point while in his service.
Mr. Daniels worked with all kinds of ammunition during his service. He worked with 45 calibers, 9 millimeters, and 8-inch Hollister shells that are about 6 foot tall. He had to take apart ammunition as well. Mr. Daniels said,
Take all the time fuses off, put them in their ready can, take all the shells and put them back in the fibers, and separate the fuses from the munitions, because you never know if a fuse was not still had the pin in, the safety pin in or not.
some fiber containers that Mr. Daniels had to deal with had to be destroyed. No one knew if this fiber was going to blow up because there was no guarantee. Mr. Daniels had never run out of any ammunition needed to supply the troops. He constantly kept up with refilling the dump with what they needed. Technology started to have an impact on new ammunition for the war. He had to learn how to use all of this new technology that came out at least every year. Mr. Daniels had to go through training to be in the Marines to deal with this type of ammunition. He had to go through 10 weeks of Army school and 2 weeks of Marine Corps peculiar substance. He had to transfer Army language to Marine Corps language. This meant that they all had to learn the different names for the same thing or object. He had a few specific memories dealing with ammunition that scared him at points. He had to change generators during a storm. He almost got struck by lightning. He ran as quickly as he could to keep the Jeep he drove in. When Mr. Daniels had to set off TNT, it startled him a little bit. It made him realize that he was dealing with some scary stuff. Mr. Daniels and the rest of his group realized what their jobs were. He realized that the corps men and the ammo dump was the main thing the enemy wanted during the war. He knew that the enemy wanted to destroy the ammo dump so that our country would not have any ammunition to fight with. He realized that he couldn't take anything for granted during this time. He knew he had to take his job really seriously. Mr. Daniels misses being in the Marines. If he could, he would re-enlist. Mr. Daniels said,
Not a day that don't go by that, I think of the times I had, the people I've met, the places I've been, that the Marine Corps is a good organization. I wish I was in another unit, maybe not ammunition, maybe helicopters or with the air wing or with tanks or something like that. But even still, if I went to them units, I would probably still be an ammo tech too.
"We are very grateful to Mr. Daniels for serving in the United States Marine Corps. He was a brave man who wanted to help protect our country. He went through a lot during his time in the Marines. Thank you for your service in the United States Marine Corps."